Buddy's Book, the first episode of Steven Universe's new regular weekly schedule. Yes, it looks like Cartoon Network has finally started to respect Steven Universe as a property and has decided to air a significant chunk of episodes on a weekly basis. I'm very excited about this, more so than I probably should be, reasonably speaking. But that's entirely beside the point. This episode is all about Steven, who accompanies Connie to the library and has never been to a library before, apparently, discovering the journal of Buddy Budwick, the first mate to Captain Dewey, who was the man who originally came to and settled Beach City, and it tells of his adventures as an explorer exploring gem locations. And of course, Steven and Connie read through the entire thing, and they imagine what they're reading, and therefore we get to see it play out before our eyes. And shockingly enough, I don't have a whole lot to talk about with this episode. I'm sure a lot of you were surprised about that, because there were a lot of little lore nuggets in this episode. But most of them are just reiterations of things we already knew. A lot of the scenes in this episode were just showing us locations that we had already seen before all over again. But there are a few interesting tidbits that I do want to talk about here that are either new or they allow us to infer something new, as well as, talking about the episode itself, obviously. I think it's interesting that Buddy doesn't start out specifically to look for gem locations, that he just kind of happens upon the Strawberry Battlefield, and that's just kind of the first noteworthy place that he actually found, and that it's Garnet and Pearl who he encounters at the Strawberry Battlefield who kind of give him the idea to go and look at other gem locations, with Garnet basically telling him that he should. I also want to point out that we actually know where the Strawberry Battlefield is now. It's in Norway, which is pretty interesting. We also get a feel for where some of the other locations could be based on what order they show them in Buddy's travels. Like, for example, the next place he goes is the Sky Spire, the location where we first met Opal, which leads me to think, looking at Buddy's map of gem locations, that it is that other X that we see in that same general area as the Strawberry Battlefield. Though that could also be the Pyramid Temple, I guess, technically speaking, since Buddy did treat those as two different locations in his journal. It's kind of hard to tell. The point is that we now have a starting point from which to talk about where these locations could be. And Buddy sees a lot of stuff. He goes to a lot of these locations and he explores them pretty thoroughly. He even discovers something that we hadn't seen in the show, at least not in the modern era of the show, and that is Blue Diamond's chair. He found it ruined in some unknown location. We don't know where it is, which is interesting, but it doesn't actually tell us anything. It's just Blue Diamond's chair, and it just happens to be here on Earth. It's not actually back on Homeworld with Blue Diamond, which is actually what I was talking about before. This revelation doesn't really give us room to speculate. It just exists, if that makes any sense. I thought it was interesting that each of the gems contributes something to Buddy's journey. Pearl takes his map of the world and marks it with X's representative of all the gem locations because she thinks he should avoid them. Garnet is the one who suggests to him that he should actually visit those places. And then later in the kindergarten, it's Amethyst who convinces him to go and find the location that ends up changing his life. Because after the kindergarten, Buddy goes to Africa to look for the Sand Castle, which is the structure that is constantly being built and rebuilt by the Desert Glass, which puts him in the same general location as where Steven found Lion. And it's in that location that he encounters Rose with a pride of 7 lions. Regular lions, not magical lions. And yes, before you say anything, we do know that they're regular lions. Buddy was a detailed writer, and he was looking for things that were out of the ordinary. If these lions had been odd colors or had odd powers, he would have made note of it. Anyway, that tangent done, because I know somebody was going to argue that point. That tangent done, Buddy is trying to find the sandcastle at this point because he's realized that all these other gem locations he's visited, they've already been visited by people. He's not the first person to find them, but supposedly no one has ever found the sandcastle. And of course, Rose points it out to him. Turns out she saw it first. But Rose, being Rose, seeing the good in all things, points out that even if he didn't discover any of these places, he described them in such detail, in a way that no one ever had, and that suggests that maybe he should be an author. And that's what he ends up becoming. It was very cool that Rose's contribution to his journey was a contribution to not just this journey, but to his life's journey. Because it was because he became an author that he ended up founding the library in Beach City. The library that Steven and Connie are sitting in right now telling us this story. It was just such a cool, fun way to bring the episode back around. There are a couple of interesting tidbits that I do want to bring attention to before I wrap up this review. We finally see Grandma Pizza again, which has gotten me so relieved because I was worried she had died off screen or something. I also like the consistency between the look of the gems here and the look of the gems in the colonial portrait that we saw back in so many birthdays, I think it was. Because even though Steven and Connie are imagining this is what they're seeing, it's not actually literally what happened, it does make sense that that is the appearance that the gems would have had at the time. I also like the subtle comedy all throughout this episode. I can't really talk about it because it's subtle enough that talking about it would spoil it, but there are just these subtle, funny moments all throughout this episode. Just sprinkled throughout the episode that don't really make you laugh out loud so much as amuse you consistently all the way through. I also want to point out that this episode does disprove the theory that Rose had Lion all the way back at the war, because it is almost definitely one of these lions or one of their descendants which she makes into Lion. And incidentally, it also supports my idea that Lion was a sort of proof of concept that gem abilities could be given to an organic being. And it's gotten me really pumped to learn more about Lion. There is a leaked list of supposed upcoming episode titles, and one does seem to be a origin story for Lion. If those titles turn out to be real, considering how long it's been since we got our last Lion-themed episode, it was a really good idea to include this scene with the lions to kind of whet our appetite for that episode. Overall, I really enjoyed this episode. I'm not sure 100% that it needed to exist. It was interesting. It was a bit of the in-universe history that I thought was pretty interesting. But considering it didn't really teach us anything new, and it didn't really seem to introduce anything new that we're not going to learn eventually anyway, I'm not sure it needed to exist, but it was definitely good enough that I'm glad that it does. And of course, seeing Steven and Connie together is always a treat, so there is that. All of that said, guys, what did you think of this episode? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.
But Rose didn't have a lion.
I realized I was surrounded by her pack of 7 lions.